This is the second attempt at recording the 46th episode of the We Are Not Lonely podcast. Namaskaram. Welcome back to the podcast, humanity. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have you here. So this is a sort of a filler episode, and the reason for this is primarily because I'm going to be spending the next couple of weeks traveling around, attending my friends' weddings. A bunch of them decided to get married, and I now have to attend 4 weddings in 1 week. It's going to be tiring, it's going to be a little difficult, but you know what, I love these guys, I'm going to get there. And to be fair, I was the one who manifested this. I did say that I wanted to spend some more time with these boys, didn't I? So the universe heard me as always and decided to grant me my wish. And here I am. So just in case the universe is listening, I'm just going to put out an intention for some intense wealth and some beautiful life experiences, travel, long travels, moving abroad, maybe, I don't know, just putting out all these magical things and putting it into a podcast. We'll see what happens. So humanity, like I said, this is a filler episode and I'm going completely extempore. I am sitting in front of the mic and I'm just staring at an empty laptop screen. Well, it isn't empty. I do have my recording software going on in the background, but you get what I'm saying. Now the thing is, all of this has made me realize the importance of having pre-recorded content, and that's something I'm working towards. I do need to create a sort of a content pipeline. I realized that in the months that I was away, I could have done that, but my bad. I'm still on this whole productivity journey. I'm still working things out in my head and in my life. And I'm trying to put together this principle of improvement on a daily basis. And I think I'm getting there, but it's such a long journey. It's going to go on forever. Now, the idea is that ideally you spend every day trying to improve. And that's a good way to do things. I think it's a Japanese concept that came out initially. It was originally a Japanese concept. I think it's called Kaizen. You aim to get a daily improvement. You aim to improve on a daily basis. I think it's also part of the whole Bushido, perhaps, the samurai philosophy. But I'm not too sure. Don't quote me on that. As I think it's kind of obvious, I do have a cold, sort of. The weather is changing here, and perhaps this whole thing of me walking around without a t-shirt when I'm at home might not be the best idea. But to be fair, I am kind of proud of the fact that I've trained to the point where I'm able to do that. It's really cool. I think it's really cool. But here we are now, improving every single day. So there seem to be a lot of obstacles in getting this particular podcast up and running. This particular episode I've been forced to stop a couple of times. I stopped the recording a couple of times. That was a dumb move. I didn't probably need to do that. But it's okay, it's happened and we're gonna push on. I want to talk to you about 2 particular things, right? The first thing is gonna be a sort of a journey that I'm trying to document. And that's part of what I'm trying to do on YouTube as well. The second thing is going to be about... It's sort of connected to point number 1. The reason I do extremely long form content, right? Because I have received a lot of feedback from my friends saying, dude, like nobody's going to watch such a long video where there's almost nothing being said. Now, honestly speaking, I've probably put out a video where I spoke about why I started a YouTube channel. I think I do have a video. Yes, I do have a video where I spoke about the reasons why I started a YouTube channel. And one of them was this point that I heard from Andrew Kirby talking about how I should create where I consume. And I'm just gonna be straight up, man. I'm an artist. I don't draw as much as I used to these days. Earlier, I would draw for like 4 to 5 hours a day, I think. I don't quite remember, man. I want to draw more, but I'm not at that point where I'm able to create art at the level I want to. I'm not able to invest adequate time into art, and that's a whole video by itself. I'll talk about that there. But my point is this, right? I am creating for a consumer like me. When I used to draw, what I'd do is I'd play a super long podcast in the background, mostly Joe Rogan, and I'd sit there drawing, and every once in a while I'd come across some interesting point, and I would jot that down as I was drawing. And I really enjoy that particular process. My brain, another, like, I do understand that people say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't multitask," and I agree. You definitely shouldn't multitask. Your brain sort of can't focus on too many things. But this is particularly when you're trying to switch between different modes. What I've found, and this works for me, and I'm pretty sure that it works for other artists too, right? So when I drive, I listen to podcasts. When I sit down and do some art, I listen to podcasts. Now, I don't do this when I'm writing because the part of the brain that listens and interprets words is not the same part of the brain that is required for me to draw. So I'm able to draw while listening to a podcast. And I'm able to listen to a podcast and absorb a great deal of information while drawing. And I like the way I do that. Now, alternatively, I could just sit and listen to music, which is what I used to do when I used to stream back on Twitch. And incidentally, that's how this whole process of content creation started. I used to be a Twitch streamer. I was like, hey, listen, I'm spending at least an hour and a half drawing every day anyway. So why don't I just record the entire thing? Why don't I just put it up for people to see? And I did it consistently for about a month. I was doing this whole 100 hands challenge and I recorded the entire thing, and slowly that kind of fell away. I did do a lot of gaming as well. That's when I started gaming a lot more. I started playing Valorant. I started playing Age of Empires 2, competitively, mind you. I would play ranked. Now, I was horrible at Valorant, but that's not the point. I was pretty decent at League of Legends, and I mean, sorry, not League of Legends. I was playing Age of Empires 2. I was pretty decent at League of Legends as well, but it's been a very long time since I played LoL. So anyway, getting back to my initial point, the two things that I'm trying to talk about on YouTube. One is I'm trying to document and understand the process that took me from being... Back in 2015, I was this guy who would... I took like a year off between studying for my bachelor's and my master's. And the reason that I gave was I wanted to find myself. I didn't really travel all that much. I wish I did. It's one of my major regrets during that period. I didn't travel as much as I should have. And at that particular point, I was about 24 years old. No, wait, hold up. This is 7 years ago. I'm 29 now. 2015 was me being about 21, 22. My mistake. So 21, that is 2015, I was 21 back then. And when I began my MBA, I was 22. Now, I took a whole year off in between college to focus on myself, quote unquote. I did make a great deal of progress in a bunch of things. I learned a great deal of things in the spiritual realm. I learned about the Shastras. I learned about certain Nitya Karmas, as they would call it. And the only issue was that I wasn't progressing. Alright, I was deeply addicted to Instagram. I would spend hours just sitting on my phone, scrolling, snapshotting, a bunch of things, screenshotting a bunch of things. And I wasn't getting much done. It was not a particularly good way that I was living. And from that individual all the way to today, now I'm trying to sort of decode my whole productivity journey. I know that the fact that I was in an MBA did a great deal of internal alchemy, I suppose. My MBA transformed me more than just the course itself, because a bunch of people did the MBA along with me, and not all of them were transformed like I was. Now, it's not like saying I'm something special or anything like that, but what I am trying to get at is the fact that I wanted to change. I sort of had a goal, and over the 1 year that I did take as a break, I did evolve a great deal on the inner front. I did a great deal of work. I was still grappling with the shadow at that point, but I did a great deal of dream work as well. I was super into the dream realm at that point. I was doing a lot of one-eye mancy. That's where you dream walk or lucid dream and all of that stuff. At that point, that was kind of my thing. It wouldn't be an understatement to say that I was spending and giving an unhealthy time and amount of dedication to my dreams and to the dream realm. Waking reality kind of took a backseat to the dream realm. And I was exploring the dream realm a great deal at that particular point. And somewhere along the way, I ended up picking up this habit of martial arts, and that was the first thing that really set the building block for discipline. Now, apart from a small period of time when I was physically unwell, when I had some health issues, whenever I'm sick, I don't practice. I do yoga whenever I fall sick, but generally speaking, whenever I'm not well, I don't do the more harsh forms of practice. I don't do the Ugram, the Thandam and all that. So that was starting martial arts was the first key, the first building block of discipline, because that meant that my morning was in order. At one particular time, I would practice twice a day. I'd practice along with my teachers at the institute at Gurudev, what eventually became Gurudev Martial Arts, but at that time it was the Mysore Wushu Academy. And I slowly evolved. And this whole process of training, of becoming adept at using myself as a weapon, it played a huge role. And for the majority of the past 7 to 8 years, I can proudly say, apart from a few days in between where I was unwell, I've always kept physically active, more or less. There's always something happening. I always ensure that I do some physical activity. And that's how I've lived my life, right? Like I said, martial arts was the first building block. Throughout my MBA, I had some incredibly intense experiences. One of them turned my whole life upside down, and I had to rebuild everything from scratch. And I'm not going to talk about that. I don't know if I'm ever going to talk about that in public. Maybe someday, not right now. Right? So it was basically the darkest period in my life, and I got out of it. I've actually worked on a small part of a song about that particular time in my life, and I played it to my friends. And one of them said that, it's a deeply unsettling and creepy song. His words, not mine. And he refused to ever play it. He refused to work on it with us. He said he didn't like the energy that the song gave off. And I told him that that particular song was inspired by a period of time when I was at my lowest. So martial arts like became a central pillar to my life, and I started building everything in my life around that particular pillar. Now, I in fact even chose my college where I studied primarily because I wanted to continue training. That gave me another 2 years where I could polish my skills, and I did. Although I do primarily own practice, I've attended very few sessions with initial phases. Yes, I attended a lot of sessions with a group, but as time passed, I would train by myself, and that's primarily how I got better. I just drilled the same thing again and again and again and again, like almost thousands and thousands of times. And that got me to where I am today. That was the first building block. Now, I've also spoken about the second particular building block, which was art, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. Everybody says that, but I didn't realize just how true this was until necessity made its need felt. Now, at that particular time, the reason for me to become more productive was I was doing a decent amount of sadhana. I was waking up quite early so that I could work out and do the rest of my things. I was incredibly inefficient with how I managed my time, but I was trying to improve. And this whole concept of time management was something that I picked up during my post graduation, during my MBA. My professors made it abundantly clear that a successful manager, and technically we were all management students because we were studying a management course. We were studying a Master of Business Administration, essentially to become mid to high level managers. Like also low level, but let's just face the facts. That's how things go in India. My point is that these are they sowed the seeds for transformation during my entire course. I was very receptive to knowledge. I was ready to accept anything that made sense to me. And as time passed, because of the whole changes in what I was doing and in my system, and I was being guided. At that particular point of time, I was also going to therapy because life was a bit of a mess, and my therapist actually helped me get my life together. He taught me about, oh yeah, you can make goals, and that's when I actually for the first time tried to make a routine, and I failed incredibly. But I did make up a bunch of habits where I would sit down and, oh yeah, this is what I do and this is what I do. And he gave me like this goal. I had to study for 4 hours a day, and I was I'm very clever. So I made my sadhana part of the 4 hours of study because I needed to study by myself. I need to study my body, my mind. So meditation and all of that was part of the studies. And I would spend about 2.5 hours on academic studies. And while at an initial point I was just reading through the books and falling asleep halfway through because the information was just so dense, I got to a point towards the end of my masters where I was improving tremendously at, well, the traditional education system. I was getting a lot better in scoring marks, and it felt very nice because I was initially quite the good student, but I suppose I never really learned to have a work ethic. Now, I would study English a great deal and a bunch of other subjects because I found them easy to do. It was play to me but work to others. Reading Shakespeare was play to me but work to others, and I was really good at understanding the lines that Shakespeare had written. And I think back in 11th and 12th, this is 2011 and 12 and 13 technically, back in that time, I was reading Shakespeare a lot. I was super into English, computers, and a bunch of other associated subjects. But English and computers were my main bread and butter. These were the two things I was super good at. Accounts and commerce, not so great. I was good at math, I was kind of good with numbers, but I wasn't the best. I didn't spend enough time gathering those skills, right? And I expected things to get easy. I suppose that's why I went wrong with my whole education. I dropped in my rank from. I used to be a rank holder, I used to be first and second. I dropped from that coveted place all the way down to 7, 8. And this was with me putting in very little effort. I stayed at that position. I salvaged that position in school with very little effort. All right. And even when I was doing my BCom, I barely put in effort. I focused primarily on music and certain extracurricular activities, which I will not talk about here. But a lot of my energy was going into music and the choir. And at that point in time, I was part of an a cappella group. So I was investing a great deal of time there as well. But the point I was trying to make is that early on I sort of realized something about myself. It took some time for me to realize it, and I actually found out all of these revelations came to me in a dream, like about myself, right? So I realized that I was very good at the things that I found interesting and I pursued with that interest, right? If I didn't like something, I put zero effort into it. I wouldn't even touch it. But just through sitting in class and going through what the teacher had said, just being present itself was enough to get me my passing marks. That was the interesting part. Now, I'm not doing this to show off or anything, but essentially what I'm trying to say is I lost that skill. I didn't cultivate that skill of working for marks until I got to my MBA. So there was this huge dip. This was around the time that I sort of became disillusioned with the entire education system. I had a bunch of questions. There were these really existential questions that was starting to have, like what is life all about? Why are we here? What are we doing? Who am I? At the at the bottom of all of it was obviously who am I? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? Why life? Why am I here? All of those questions sort of started being planted in my head post 10th, 11th, and 12th, right? This was around the time that I started having these identity crises at that age. And I suppose you could say that was some people would say that's sort of like a spiritual awakening. You're being called your certain activation of certain things. And looking back, I sort of realized that this was actually around the time that my Shani Dasha had started. And I'm trying to go back and understand all of this from a very neutral perspective because I do have a really good memory and I have to be really careful not to cut myself with it. It's so sharp sometimes. I love that quote by quote. Anyway, what I was saying was I lost the habit, the skill of studying and working for marks, right? Around the same time, I sort of became disillusioned with the whole system. I sort of understood that there was something else going on. There's a sort of a rat race, there's a rhythm. I wanted to break beyond that. I wanted to see what was beyond that. And I suppose looking back at all of that now, I had seen Preyaha, which is Dharma Artha Kama, and I was like, hey, is this all there is to life? This can't be all there is to life, right? Everybody's doing the same thing. If everybody's doing the same thing, without questioning it, are they mad or am I mad? And I had all of these questions, but I didn't have anybody to really ask these questions. Now, after I graduated from, I finished my 12th standard, I finished my boards, and I got into BCom in Christ, right? Just before I got to Christ University, literally the day before, the couple of days before I got to Christ University, I was initiated into this particular path of, I had a Brahma Upadesham. I turned 18 a couple of months back, and sometime in June, I think it was 9, 10, 11, 10 and 11 possibly, or 9 and 10, because I had to attend college the freshers day on the very next day after my whole situation. The day after my Brahma Upadeshan ceremony was when I had to go attend college. Now, generally speaking, I don't know if I've ever spoken about this before, but Brahma Upadesham is a ceremony where the student is given a diksha of a particular mantra, and basically what happens is at that point the student gets the adhikaram, the right to study the Vedas. They call this the person who gets this ceremony done is known as a twice born. Now, of course, there's going to be questions of caste and elitism and Brahmanism coming up, and I'm just going to admit to some certain facts, right? Initially speaking, this knowledge was freely available. Over time, it did get corrupted. I'm not going to say no. I am not sure about the veracity of some of the claims, because those who have actually studied the Vedas and understand it know that caste, that is, the circumstances of one's birth, do not determine who you are. It's part of it. I mean, it does determine where you start from, but your actions are yours and yours alone in the end, right? The point I'm trying to make is initially at one particular phase, the first three, the upper echelons of society, that is the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, were all expected to undergo this ceremony and then study the Vedas under a competent guru. They would leave their house and go study with a competent guru. And that was sort of the whole process that I was going through as well. I was studying in a boarding school for most of my life. I studied in a boarding school for most of my life, I think from first standard all the way to 12th. And just as I was getting into college, I wasn't even getting to stay at home. I mean, I did sort of like found a second home, a second family, and all of that. And it's a beautiful story. This is not something I'm going to talk about right now, but suffice it to say, I didn't feel like a stranger. It felt I was home always. And I still refer to wherever that place is, wherever those particular people are in my life, that is home as well. Now, point that I was trying to make, right? I went to Christ, I got initiated into this particular process, and I started doing the rituals in a very ritualistic manner. And I will just say this, man. Doing things in... I was pretty regular with the Anushtanams. I didn't know much about how to do those Anushtanams, but I did them with an open heart. At least, I've taken up the responsibility, I will do it. At this particular time, I'm going to do it. And that's how I went ahead and did things. Now, that particular time, I was actually living... We were living in a PG, three of us. I was living with two of my friends from school, and I'm not going to mention their names, but it was a beautiful time because we were living next to a masjid, and the masjid would go off at 5 a.m. and my friend actually had classes early in the morning at 6:30, and he needed to be there. He would sleep through, but I would wake up and I would wake him up. And, I'd send him to get his ablutions done, and his mum would call, and I would answer the phone and say, "Don't worry, auntie, our man's gone, he's getting ready, don't worry about it." At that particular point in time, I would have actually gotten ready already, and I would go out and I would do my upasana, and I would wake my other friend up, and then we'd eventually, get to college, we'd have a slight breakfast there and all of that. Now, this lasted only for one semester due to a bunch of reasons, and a lot of issues happened. But both of those guys are married, by the way. Yeah, both of those guys got married. And that was how college was initially. It was the first time I was learning to live by myself, and it was pretty cool, pretty sweet, I won't lie. Eventually things changed. We were no longer living in a PG, I was living with my friend's house. But before that, there was a small period when I was living in a very far away place. I mean, it's this place called Banshankari, and I had to get from Dairy Circle, which is Christ University, all the way to Banshankari. Now, I couldn't afford to take an auto every single day, so I had to take a bus. And it got to a point where, because of choir, I would have to stay back till 7:30, and I would hop onto the bus, and like, this is peak Bangalore traffic, man. So it would take me a couple of hours to go back and reach home. And it's not like I was getting an AC bus every single day, you know? I would sometimes wait, but if the waiting got too long, I just hop on any available bus that I could find. And those buses were jam packed, man. It was quite the experience. I've had that experience as well. Taking buses, riding for 2 hours in a bus, reaching home so tired that I had zero energy. I would just, wash my face, have a bath, and just plop onto the bed and pass out. I did, sometimes I'd have something to eat at college itself, because 7:30 to 9:30 I would be super hungry by the time I got back home. And that was my life for about an entire semester, and I was actually doing pretty good that semester. And then things changed. I Towards the end of that semester, I moved back in, with my friend. He was actually part of the three roommates. One of the roommates went ahead, got his own place to stay. The other guy had a place to stay in Bangalore, so I was staying with him and his family. And that's the person I was telling you, the second house, the second home that I found. So anyway, yeah, that was about the time I moved in with my friend and his family, and that became a whole different experience. And I was there until college got done. So that was life back in college. I wasn't very particularly organized, but I was quite focused on one thing and one thing only, which was music. I pretty much, I wouldn't say I achieved a great deal, but I did get to sing for His Holiness while I was there, and I think that's a pretty cool deal, all things considered. So after this, I took the entire year break that I was telling you about. But throughout all of these days, I was still continuing my Upasana, and my Upasana kind of evolved as time passed. I committed certain things to memory, and life was going on that way. That was the other thing, the daily discipline that really helped get my life together. Some sort of a spiritual practice is definitely necessary. That really takes you leagues ahead of the competition. As time passed, that happened, and eventually I got to a point. I'm fast forwarding the next couple of years all the way to 2018. I completed my MBA. A great deal of positive growth and development happened during that particular time. And when I finally I completed my MBA, and I picked up this one rather particular interesting book called Kabbalah. And that spoke about how I could achieve anything and everything I wanted to do in life. Now, I have to admit that at this particular time in life, I haven't quite completed the book. Alright, but it set me on that course of asking questions to myself. What do I want with my life? And that's actually when I first started to attempt to keep a journal. That's the beginning of my journaling journey. This is 2018 August. The book actually recommended keeping a journal and write. It said that you don't have to write in it every single day, but if you did, it would be nice. And I sort of started keeping a journal around that time. It wasn't consistent, it wasn't every single day, but that's when it happened, right? And now, as time passed again, certain things leveled up. I sort of realized what I wanted from life, and I decided to pursue those things in life. I wrote down a bunch of things that I wanted back in 2018, and as time passed, I realized that yes, I've sort of accomplished everything on that list. I wanted to become better at martial arts, I wanted to learn Sanskrit, I wanted to learn the Vedas. I did all of those. That was brilliant, and I have spoken about this before. This pursuit of knowledge did leave me in a disadvantageous position in one aspect of my life, which is money. Right? I had these, but look at the things, right? I was building these great habits. I was doing physical fitness on an everyday basis. I was doing a meditative journey. I was doing some sort of a spiritual activity. I started learning how to think by writing down in my journal. And of course, like, I've always had the habit of reading, which is definitely one of the reasons my whole journey happened. My love for reading. And then when I picked up art, I started picking up each of these activities, man. I realize now that I am sort of a creative person, and if I don't have a creative outlet, it feels like I'm dying. So I did pick up a bunch of creative pursuits, and I'm trying at this particular moment in life, I'm trying to struggling to maintain them all, right? But I'll do it. I'm pretty sure I can. I will. I'm definitely gonna do it. So all of that happened sometime after the whole MBA thing. That's when I discovered Jordan Peterson and this whole virtuous cycle of learning about better things happened, because my mind was purely about self improvement at that particular point. And it's an interesting thing, right? I've realized now that the algorithm is just a reflection of what you want. And at any particular point, it's almost like manifestation in a way, because what you want in your mind is what you put into the search bar. And if you're not conscious enough about it, you might get stuck at that level where you're just taking from what's presented to you. If you're not actively searching and you just look at the options that you have, and that's sort of like passive. I mean, you do scroll and then pick, but sometimes there's this possibility of endless doom scrolling. That's also another possibility. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, this is probably a science. People might have done this before, and I could probably do it in a much more streamlined manner. What can I do to improve my life? And that's when I started searching things online, and growth skyrocketed. 2018 to 2023, I'm almost like an entirely different person. Yeah, not almost, I'm an entirely different person. I've built so many good things. I've built up so many good habits. I've picked up so many good pieces of knowledge I've met. And in the recent years, because of my willingness to try new things and jump out of my comfort zone, I've had some beautiful experiences. So that's the whole thing, man. Like, I didn't go too deep into the things that were kind of helping me get to where I am. I think I might have missed point number 2, but we'll probably get to that another time. This, like I said, was kind of extempore. I went on this whole journey myself. It took me like 10, 15 years back into the past, and I say that just not so nonchalantly, but it's hard to believe now. I can say 10, 15 years, and that's literally half my life at this particular point. 15 years ago was half my life ago. That's incredible in a way. And eventually I know, and I'm going to fix this particular moment in time so that I remember it in the future, when I can look back at this time and say 30 years ago, and I'll be like, hey, I said something like 30 years ago. I said 15 years ago was half my life, and 30 years in the future, I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna realize, hey, I said this, and I said that I would say this. It's gonna be so nice. But yeah, man, that's about it. I will streamline this particular podcast when I get back. It's kind of getting late. I think I'm gonna have to leave I'll finish the mix and master immediately after, but I'm gonna be doing the editing when I get back from Bangalore. So thank you for joining me, everybody. I will see you again in the next episode next week. Jai Shri Ram Punarmilam.